So could I set a fastest known time on the shorter but hillier 215 kilometer Gran Fondo after doing the devil route in 9 hours last year? The target for this year was 6 hours 30 minutes or less, and could I achieve that after yesterday's 180 kilometer event around Pembrokeshire? Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Quick summary on that last video: 180 kilometers over 300 TSS and 2 hours spent at 310 watts in the last 80 kilometers. I was pretty cooked after it, but today we go again. So the Dragon ride is in its 20th year, hence the very lovely 20th numbers on the ribbon. Now this year I wanted to challenge myself with the shorter 215 kilometer event as opposed to the near 300 kilometer event I did last year in 9 hours. Why? Mainly because I wanted more intensity in my riding as opposed to the duration. The longer you ride, of course, generally the less intense you can make it. So by doing the shorter route, I would hopefully be able to hit some higher wattages. And this is all part of my training for a double event: gravel and UCI Gran Fondo in Switzerland. Now this course actually has more climbing per kilometer than the much larger Devil route, because technically it only misses out one climb, and that is the Devil's Staircase in mid-Wales. Now on that ride last year, I managed my best 215 kilometer section in about 6 hours and 50 minutes. That actually came on the latter stages where it was a lot hillier because I played a massive negative split so that I could finish strong. But in order to achieve that this year on this ride, I would have to ride from start to finish 215 kilometers as efficiently, effectively, and with as much power as I possibly could manage. I very much ran the same setup as I did the day before, mainly because I was so tired I couldn't actually change anything on the bike. I couldn't really be bothered, but I did manage to wash it and re-wax the chain and all that good stuff. Essentially it was the same setup, same deep section wheels, same tires. Now in terms of nutrition, again, things were very similar except for a couple of tweaks. This course is obviously longer. The event yesterday took me 5 hours and this was going to take me approximately 6.5. So I did need to either stop for more fuel, or I would have to have somebody, like Charlie maybe, to stop and maybe hand me up a bottle or two at around the halfway mark. Now this is actually what I went for. Charlie very kindly gave up her Sunday morning to come and stand on the side of a road in the middle of the Brecon Beacons. She handed me up 2 bottles which were full of 60 grams of carbohydrate mix each. Unlike yesterday with the highly concentrated mixes in my bigger bottles, I went for a more evenly distributed 60 grams per bottle. So every bottle had 60 grams of carbohydrates in, and I think I went through 4 or 5 bottles, and I actually still used the Camelback bladder on my back, which also had around about 500 mils of liquid and 60 grams of carbohydrates. This event again was purely fueled on energy gels, the 50 gram kind, and to be honest, I'm like finding zero fault in this nutrition strategy whatsoever, and I seem to be performing quite well on it, so hence why I'm sticking with it. I did have one thing that was slightly off the usual plan, and that was a chocolate brownie that I picked up in the local shop, newsagents, the day before. More just morale food than anything to have at the halfway mark. So this is a tough course, 215 kilometers and about 3,500 meters of elevation gain. After yesterday's efforts, it took me a while to warm up, 90 minutes probably. I had to get over the first major climb of the day to finally realize that, yeah, my legs are going to show up today. The first hour was a fairly casual affair as we were rolling along in a good sizable group with some people that I've known locally for a long time and some new faces too. 231 watts normalized power for the first 60 minutes was the damage. 35.6 kilometers an hour was the average speed. Now in order to attain this goal of sub 6.5 hours, I would have to maintain an average speed of at least 33.1 kilometers per hour. Now this is made more difficult by the fact that the first hour and a half is generally the flattest section. The last section, there's a lot of climbs and they come thick and fast, and there's actually very little chance to make up any kind of speed that you lose. So I had a climbing plan. It was very rough, but for any climb that was 5% average or lower, I would ride it around 300 to 320 watts. Anything above 5%, I'm talking more like 10%, which there were a handful of times, but generally they would be much shorter climbs. I would ride at about 350 watts. Still below FTP, of course, but bearing in mind that because these shorter bouts at that percentage gradient were very short, I was able to get away with riding a little bit harder. The longer climbs are generally more shallow, so hence why I could get away with just riding at a steadier 300 and 320 watts. Steadier. Now the rest of the time, I was riding around about 250 watts, which is probably around 70%, 65-70% of my FTP. Now Glynneath was the first climb, and just like last year, it was the first place where things started to break up. You're about an hour and 10 minutes in, give or take, and people have been very excitable for the first 30 or so kilometers. You hit the first climb, and it is a fairly substantial one. From bottom to top, you're looking at nearly 4 kilometers at 5%, but it doesn't go downhill at the top. It's one of those that just flattens off. So actually, it probably feels longer than what it actually is. Key thing for me today, and I mentioned about it in the last video, is I had to keep pressing over the top of a lot of these climbs. And any sections of road, any descents that were slightly downhill, or even if they were properly downhill, I would try and pedal as much as possible. I don't have to be trying to maintain 250, 300 watts, but I just needed to keep momentum going, because later on in the day, as the roads get narrower, twistier and things like this, and also traffic too, these aren't closed roads, remember. And I know after last year's video, many people were saying I wouldn't pay to do this event because it's not on a closed road. Well, it's extremely difficult to close roads in the UK in general, and to do it over this sheer size of event, I really don't know how they would do it, to be honest with you. It's one thing I had to keep in mind. So pushing on over the tops of the climbs into the descents, and the ones that I could pedal on, I would keep pedaling on just to maintain that speed as much as possible. I'd like to go into a lot of detail about this event. It's a fantastic event. There's spectacular scenery. You catch it on a good day when the weather's good, and it's one of the best rides you'll ever do. I guarantee it. The only thing I'd say is, though, that my ride was very uneventful. Nothing really happened out of the ordinary, and it's usually a sign that everything has just gone smoothly. When nothing really happens that you can just say like, oh, I should have done this or that. Nothing like that happened. So unlike some of these events I've done in the past, this event was one of the smoothest in terms of hitting targets and just getting through the day and over the climbs as best as possible. However, the story to get there is worth telling. Getting over the first climb of the day, the first major climb, the Black Mountain, was where I would see my first real test. I could feel that there was a tailwind up there. I know these roads like the back of my hand. These are training roads I've been on for the last 15 years. I'm so happy to be able to share them with people. And riding up the Black Mountain, I had a sense already that the wave that I set off in was one of the faster waves, I think. And we'd made our way through a lot of riders before the Black Mountain. So climbing the Black Mountain, there was very few people actually there. Getting to the top, it was a wonderful descent down the other side. They've newly tarmacked some of it, and it's even better than it was before. And that's saying something, because it's one of the nicest descents I've ever done. And when you get to the bottom, unlike last year where I went straight on Llanddyfri and did the big loop for the 300 kilometer loop, I turned right and I headed across country, which is where I bumped into a friend who was just out for a ride that day with his mate. And Lewis Hobbs decided to jump on, chat to me for a bit, and then was very kind enough to give me a bit of a tow over the top of the moors and down the descent and into the next climb. He knows the roads like the back of his hand too. He's been a very successful bike racer in the past, and being able to share that moment with him and him helping me out just to give me a little bit of a break for 10 minutes was much appreciated. Now I hit the next climb and it was empty. Nobody there. I just saw one marshal directing me where to go, but it was stark contrast to last year where I was catching a lot of the people who were on the shorter loop doing that road section. And this time I was now well ahead of schedule and on my own on the road.
Well, we're just over 100 kilometers in now. I've got about 70 kilometers of really hilly stuff left, and then it's gonna be mainly downhill. Such a difference than last year, because this section of road, this climb nearing Cray, was heaving with people. But obviously, because I'm on a shorter route today, I've hit this bit earlier, much earlier. So I'm with, well, myself. And it's actually quite nice to be able to just zone out and ride my own effort here. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't biting as of yesterday's ride. But yeah, we'll dig in, because so far I've got a good average speed.
I finally caught up with Charlie and she handed me my bottle and actually the Camelback. I was having some issues with the Camelback on the start line, and I actually phoned Charlie and I said, can I just swap it? You're still on the outside of town. Can I just grab the other bottle now? I'll put it down my jersey and I'll give you the Camelback. She managed to fix the Camelback, and when I did see her later at 115 kilometers in, she gave me the Camelback, put it down the back of my jersey, and I swapped the bottle and away I went. And now I was joining into the route where a lot of people were coming from the shorter routes, and there was far more people now on the course. So making my way over the next couple of climbs down Cray, it's a beautiful, fast main road section and actually relatively quiet on a day like today. But that wouldn't last for very long. And in fact, something would happen that, well, I thought we'd gone completely wrong, but it turns out I just hadn't done my homework properly. You're supposed to take a right turn at this point to go over Devil's Elbow, called that because of the shape of the road. There's just this hairpin on it, and it's just the work of the devil, effectively. It's a very steep, short, nasty climb. Has lots of people walking, especially when they're really tired. Now, we didn't take that right turn, and I actually indicated, I put my arm out, I indicated to turn right. I had the route on my Wahoo, and then I saw the sign saying straight on, and I thought, that's weird. I'm not supposed to go that way. But anyway, I went that way. I eventually got to the main road, which turn right, and it takes you up Storey Arms. Penavan, if you've ever heard of it, one of the largest hiking peaks in South Wales, and the whole of Wales, actually. And I realised that they were now sending us up and over this long, long drag, and up and over Penderyn Moor.
Well, something's happened. I'm going to own up to it now. I didn't actually look at the route beforehand. I assumed it was the same route as last year, but then I saw that we weren't going right at the elbow, Devil's Elbow. It turns out we're heading up Storey Arms instead. This is a long main road climb. We still do the Regos of Bulk at the end. This is a different run up to it entirely. No savagely steep climb to contend with on the Devil's Elbow. I'm gutted, and also a little bit worried. My fueling strategy is going to be okay. I did not plan for this.
Now, if you're into whiskey, Penderyn Moor actually has a fine distillery there, but there was no time to stop, although there was a feed station there. Not in the distillery, but on the other side of the road. Coming over Penderyn Moor, we've actually raced over there years ago, like 17 years ago when I was a junior, going the other direction, and it's always exposed to the wind, particularly a crosswind. However, this day, it was a very slight headwind. Thankfully, it wasn't too bad. I was able to see a couple of riders in front of me and actually managed to ride with a couple as well in a pretty perfect spot on a slightly downhill section, so I can get a little bit of recovery and not quite lose out on, you know, the average speed thing. And it's 6 kilometers at about 3%, but it's a very busy main road. There's spectacular views up there, but because of the hiking hotspot, it's very busy. So that did put a little bit of a dampener on the experience, but actually, do you know what? I just think it was a great way to change the course slightly. And in my head, I'd already thought that Devil's Elbow is going to be quite tough. So to be able to go up a slightly longer but shallower climb with quite equally nice scenery, it was a nice change. Now over this section of around about 110 kilometers, there's a lot of climbs to be done. From the bottom of the Black Mountain to the very top of the Bulch, which is the final climb that you do, and then it's all downhill to the finish, there's just over 2,000 meters of climbing in the space of 110 kilometers. My average speed over this section was a lot lower than the actual average speed of the whole event, at 32.3 kilometers per hour. And it's also where I had to invest and burn a lot of matches, of course, because when you're climbing, you've got to increase the likelihood of you maintaining that average speed to get to the finish as fast as possible. So that section took me 3.5 hours to chip away at a normalized power of 279. But over the last 2 climbs, I went extremely deep and was very proud of myself to be able to hold on to 320 watts for the 15-minute climb up the Rigos, and then the near 20-minute climb up the final climb, which is the Bulch. That final hour where those 2 efforts came, the normalized power was 290 watts. So the highest it had been for the whole event. I got chatting to a couple of riders on the start line earlier in the day, and one thing I kept saying was, you know, the hardest climb is not the Devil's Staircase, you know, the hardest climb is not the Black Mountain, you know, they come quite early, relatively speaking. The hardest climbs are the last 2 climbs. You know, if you've not fueled appropriately, if you've got nothing left in the tank, if you've just ridden quite hard up until that point, it's going to be very difficult to dig deep on those final 2 climbs. And for the sheer amount of time you spend on them, you know, even for someone like myself, 15 minutes and then 20 minutes, that's a long time to be going uphill. And if you have very little left to give, then you can be on there for double the amount of time that you'd ideally want to be spending on them. And for someone like myself who's chasing a time, you know, and a finishing time, and a fast one at that, then it's even more important to have something left to climb as fast as possible near the end on those long climbs. But even if you're just trying to finish, you know, it's incredibly important to have something left for those long climbs, mentally and physically. I could see a lot of broken bodies going up the Rigos and up the Bulch. You know, I was also very broken come the Bulch. But the difference is, you know, it's the last climb. And I dug really deep on that climb to get over it in the best possible, like, speed that I can manage. And the reward you get when you get to the top is a beautiful flowing descent down all the way back to Port Talbot, and then you take the coastal road left back to the finishing Margam. I'm genuinely not, like, told to say any of this, but it's not just because I know all these roads and I've been training on them for years, but yes, there could be harder events in the UK, you know, and there is a lot of appeal in doing hard events, and people love the challenge. But you don't always have to do a hard event to find a challenge in it, you know. When it comes to speed or a speed goal or a power goal, there's always a challenge to be found. It doesn't matter how, you know, easier the course is compared to another event. And like, if the weather throws something at you, that's something else to consider. But just because this route is so, you know, it's so beautiful, you know, in very large portions of it are incredibly good places to ride. And I think that's without doing the extra loop for the Devil course. But this last You know, the way it finishes with the last couple of climbs and the long descent to the end, to the finish, it's very rewarding. It's a very rewarding event to do. And I feel like it's one that you can come back and do. It's not just one that, you know, you tick it off and it's done. It's one that you can come back and find a challenge in doing it again in a different way. So I just wanted to leave you with that. Maybe it changes your perspective on your goals or your upcoming events or your performance at this if you did this as well. This mac and cheese is a legit killer. Oh yeah, I'm rating it big time. But I tell you one thing, I was happy to finish. And the macaroni cheese that I had at the end and the can of Coke was very well deserved. So to top it off, my finishing time was 6 hours 22 minutes. 6 hours 25 minutes elapsed time. So I did beat my 6 hour 30 minute target. Normalized power was 263 watts, 5,200 kilojoules, a whopping 361 TSS. So in about 11 and a half hours of riding in 2 days, that was near 700 TSS, give or take. Needless to say, I may need a couple of days to recover. But that's where I'm going to end this video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.